What a life, what a mess I've gotten into. Now I'm stuck in the gutter with the glitter and the glue. What a life, what a mess I've gotten into. Now I'm stuck in the gutter with the glitter and the glue.
Hello and welcome to episode 27 of the Blowtorch Records podcast. As my guest today herself would say, bliss out, don't miss out. Yes, that's right, today I'm talking to Keeley Moss from Dublin's Psych Dreamcore Blissers Keeley. Of all the people in the music industry that I've interviewed or written about, Keeley is unique in that she is a concept artist and everything that she does is written about and dedicated to the memory of Inga Maria Hauser. Keeley will explain later in the podcast, as you will hear, and it's a fascinating and moving story. Keeley's artistic integrity, passion and authenticity clearly come across too. It really is a great listen. In the background you can hear the glitter and the glue from Keeley's 2021 EP, Brave Warrior. I'll put links to this, the other tracks and her social signals in the text accompanying this podcast. I'll also put a link to the Keeley Chronicles blog dedicated to the memory of Inga Maria Hauser. Hi Keeley, how are you?
Hello Richard.
Lovely to see you and to talk to you.
Likewise, lovely to see you too.
And I'm delighted with the what I see behind you as well, not just you, but your wall of rock and roll memorabilia. I can see a Pink Floyd poster, Blondie, Kate Bush, The Smiths, Stone Roses, Echo and the Bunnymen. Oh my God, it's like a wall of my favourite bands.
Oh wow, yes, it's basically I've been living here. It's sort of like, it's a bit like an underground burrow.
Okay.
It's kind of like the rock equivalent of a rabbit lair, in that I've kind of sculpted the insides of it that it would represent things that I most want to see, which is beautiful artworks of my favorite bands. So I pieced together 40 separate murals of my favorite bands' artworks. It took me about 10 years to kind of, finish it. I feel it's like the indie Sistine Chapel. But it's, basically every spare inch of space on the walls I've managed to fill with art and with music art, essentially, which I think is the most beautiful artwork ever. Like if you were to say to me, you could have any painting or any artwork in the world to look at, and if you give you the choice of the Mona Lisa or the cover of Movement by New Order, give me Movement any day. To me, it's just it's imbued with such a beauty, and it's tied in with the music as well. I love how the albums and the EPs inhabit the same space as the artwork, and in a way they're kind of inextricably linked. So when you hear music, it often sounds like the color of the cover, or it will, if you look at the artwork, it will somehow be kind of imbued with the sound of the music. There's some sort of a connection between the two. I love that. I think that's why sleeve art is so important. And even the colors that are used. And of course there is that, sound in itself has a color or has colors kind of interwoven. And especially people that are really into music often feel that is the case. And it's one of the great things about music, that you can sort of conjure up like a painting, like a sound painting, just by using different instruments or different guitar effects or certain chord sequences. You can conjure up something that's more than just the music. Yeah.
For sure, 100%. I agree. And I'm looking at I can see an Echo and the Bunnymen cover there. I was brought up with the Enemy in the 80s. I'm a big fan of the moody band shot. Staring into the distance.
staring wistfully. That's
You can't beat it. You really can't. You alluded there, several times to the texture, the feel, the essence of what music gives you. I mean, you have brought us 2 EPs this year, Echo Everywhere, just out now, and your Brave Warrior EP. Amazing musical work. Can you give us an idea, Keeley, of how you have ended up at this point? I know your previous band was a band called Session Mots. I don't know a great deal of your musical journey to that point. So can you bring me and listeners up to speed on that?
Yeah, well, essentially, I, as a child, I fell in love with music through hearing the Pet Shop Boys, West End Girls was the first song I ever fell in love with. And the album, the follow-up album actually blew my mind. That was the first album that I ever heard. And to me, it opened a world of possibilities. And I wanted to inhabit that world and listening to the radio as well, like getting my first, like a Walkman was an amazing thing because it was like, it opened up a whole vista to a private space that was my own, that I could occupy, that I could wander, and it was just, a real revelation. So I fell in love with music that way. And one thing, my parents they had a very fractious relationship. They're always breaking up. My mum married an impossible man, and they're both my mum and dad are both hotheads anyway. So they were like a really combustible blend, and so they were always having like royal rumbles, and so I was. There's only so much remonstrating you can do trying to break it up, and especially when you're not really equipped to do so. So.
Were you an only child, or are you an only child?
No, I have one younger brother, but he was, he's very, very different from me. He's not like cerebral or artistic at all. He's very kind of like, he's as different to me as can be. But what happened was I used to just as soon as I actually had access to listening to music, I would just go there, and I would just be there.
So it was an escape as much as anything, I guess.
Yeah, an escape, and escape, and also I couldn't even describe, but it was incredibly comforting and consoling, and and yet at the same time it felt very familiar. There's just something in me that is very naturally connected to music and to melody and to lyrics and to singing and certain soundscapes. So that's like my one overriding characteristic, I suppose. So feeling that very intensely, it was a fairly short stop from there to the kind of next kind of real, defining kind of landmark in my life, which was discovering the Smiths. And once I fell in love with the Smiths, that was just like the moment I heard the Smiths for the first time, it was like I'd been walking around with a blindfold on, and it was suddenly wrenched away and thrust away and thrown away. And
How old were you at that point, Keeley?
I was, this was years after they'd split, because that was one of the sad things. That I got so massively into this band that had disbanded all those years before. Yeah. So it was frustrating because to me, what they were and had been was more alive than anything that was going on in my life. But they were no longer together. So it was a strange kind of a collision whereby, to me, this was my now, but this now was then. How soon it been? But I was 15. I was 15 when I discovered the Smiths. 14, and fell in love with them. And one of the things that I really wanted to do very, very quickly on was to try and make my own music. As soon as I fell in love with the Smiths, I felt such an overriding impulse to try and express myself creatively through the medium of music, even though I couldn't play at that stage. So
Okay.
I picked up my first 3 chords. There's 3 chords and the truth. That's all you need. I was taught 3 chords, and I taught myself everything else thereafter. Very kind of not in a methodical way. Just kind of naturally, just picked it up. It just you're playing the guitar. I never sat down with tabs or chord books or anything like that. And also, I've always been able to just, and I assume that everyone did this for a long time, but if I hear something musically, I just play it. Like
Okay.
so that's my kind of way of just, if you hear it, you play it. To me, it's just like, that's what
Yeah,
you do.
it doesn't happen to everybody, Keeley, believe me.
I thought everyone could do that. But so what happened is then I tried to form a band, but I couldn't find anyone to play with because I was just the only weirdo in the village, the only
Okay.
gay in the village. Although yeah, it was a tricky time because I was surrounded by people that were very much plugged into mainstream culture, which I wasn't at all. I found it just vacuous and it just didn't appeal to me. And there weren't any Misfits in the. One of the great things about bands is that it's essentially it's like a gang. It's us against the world, and I've always been in love with that. And even like I've never lost the love for the romantic gang aspect of bands. I think it's a beautiful, brilliant thing, and when it works, it's beyond all else. But I couldn't find those other Misfits because they just weren't there at the time. Maybe I didn't look hard enough. No, I looked pretty hard. And I think just by standing out, you know this from I grew up in a very quite barbaric environment, very tough, very the kind of place where you get beaten up for not towing the line. And
Yeah, I know. I know exactly what you mean. And the problem with those environments is A, they're not conducive to creativity, but B, they actually demand conformity, because if you stand out, you get the shit kicked out of you. So everybody is the same, and whatever the current trend is, whether it's Pringle jumpers as it was back in my day, or tracksuits, or whatever it is, everybody tends to go down that route, and inside they're probably thinking, Jesus, I really actually like My Bloody Valentine, or I like Scott Walker, but they don't want to express it. That's the problem.
That's exactly it. And that's something I think I was headed for a collision course from the get-go, because I had this conflict between my nature, which was to very much be like that, and the safer route, which was to try and deny that and to try and fit in. And I chose the road less traveled, or the rougher road. And there was one particular moment that just stands out in my mind. I remember being in school, and again, hyper conformity kind of environment. And the teacher was, for some reason, they wanted to make an example of how many hours a week people watched TV. And they went around the class. I think the first person they asked, and there was this, I could see it in all the students. They were terrified of saying anything that would mark them out as being different. So this person, I think, said whatever it was, 20 hours or whatever it was. And then the next person, 20 hours. This person, 20 hours, 20 hours, 20 hours. And it went around and around, and not one answer deviated from that. And as it was, I was already like, the scapegoat, or not the scapegoat, but just like, the villain of the piece, in that, I had no friends growing up at all.
Well, the Misfits misfit, you said to me.
Misfits misfit. And as the closer they were coming to me, I remember thinking to myself, I just know I'm going to say the worst possible thing. And because I knew that I was going to get, shit kicked out of me, what I was going to say, but I needed to counter this identikit answer with something that would retain a vestige of my individuality, which I was desperately trying to hold on to at that time. And my favorite TV show at the time was Prisoner Cell Block H, and it was always 55 minutes long to allow for 5 minutes of ads. And it was my favorite show. How much TV I would have watched each week, maybe 8 hours, 7 hours, 9 hours, who knows? But I remember thinking, okay, when it comes to me to answer this question, I'm going to say 55 minutes, which was the most, ridiculous. Instead of if I'd said an hour, that would have been enough of it, But no, I had to go one step further and make myself even more of a target for the boo boys and the boo girls. So it came to me and I said 55 minutes, and there was this eruption of laughter, really mocking laughter, mocking voices. What is that Joy Division line? Mocking voices fill the halls. And that set the tone for another dreadful day. But I'm looking back, and even at the time, I was really proud of myself that I stuck to my guns. And that answer, that tendency to be just that bit off kilter, and be willing to take the rap for something that at the time had given me zero credit and zero anything. But it's the same spirit that is in me now that enables me to write the way I do and to live the way I do, regardless of what flack I face. So I think that's really important. And I look at that now and I think, wow, I think throughout history, it's the job, and throughout music history, it's the job of the weirdos and the outsiders and those that are deemed mad or deemed flawed in whatever way, to be enough of a beacon to stand for what they believe in and to dare to do things in a different way or say things in a different way, no matter how uncommercial or unpalatable that is at the time.
No, I get that from you. I mean, I get that from what you've just said, and I kind of had that feeling about you before we talked. I mean, we've never talked in person before today, and I know you're very active on social media, but you come across as somebody with integrity. And you have artistic integrity without a doubt. And I've just actually finished the Will Sargent book.
Bunnyman.
The Bunnyman, yeah, it's great. I mean, that's exactly the culture that he describes. He was very different. He had a very difficult family upbringing on a council estate in Liverpool. It was, mainly football, beer and girls, and he didn't fit into that. And it was very difficult, but he stood up and carried on, and they eventually became the Bunnymen. I mean, it's a kind of similar kind of path, I suppose. Yeah, it's kind of funny to think how many people fell by the wayside, isn't it, Keeley? Do you think there were people who were brilliant poets or authors or musicians and just never got to do it because the school system or the peer group system just didn't allow them to, or they felt they weren't able to stand up to it?
Yeah,
kind of scary, really, to think about it. And that's very much Morrissey's experience, isn't it? I mean, in his school life that I'm sure you've read about, I know I've read about it obsessively as well. Belligerent ghouls run Manchester schools. I mean, it says it all, doesn't it?
It does.
Fair play to you, fair play to you for standing up for what you believed in.
Thank you very much. It's the Headmaster Ritual. I think that's one of the reasons why the music of and the lyrics of the Smiths chimed with me so much as it did, because I could relate to it so much on a life level, and also I just knew it was telling me the truth. I knew it wasn't giving me the saccharine, sanitized version. It was telling it as it was, which Too Unlimited weren't doing. And Boyzone weren't doing, and the top 40 wasn't doing, and the top 40 to this day isn't doing. But it's those that are on the outer fringes, those of them that are sufficiently bold enough and brave enough. And obviously the Smiths really wonderfully infiltrated the mainstream. That's a really fantastic thing when a band with an outsider perspective can do that. I mean, it happens occasionally. Obviously, Nirvana, the Smiths, Radiohead. There are bands that manage to and manage to do so whilst retaining their own integrity and their own identity. The Cure being another great example. They're an extraordinary band in that they've never compromised their ideals ever. I mean, they're a genre unto themselves, The Cure, I think, and they're so huge. But that's another day's work. I could talk about The Cure for hours. But getting back to what was I saying there about the Headmaster Ritual, and the brutality of that environment. Yeah, that's that sort of environment, and it's something that obviously the Floyd and Roger Waters in particular wrote about very extensively, and kind of reached its apogee with The Wall, where you have this almost like this. The school system is almost like a battery farm, and those within it are almost treated like malleable material. And there was always this feeling like when I was in school, it was very much, and I had this very distinct impression of it, that this was merely prep for the IT sector to get their desk fodder. And that's all it was. Because in the school I was in, there was no music in the school. There was no art in the school. The reason there was no art was because at the junior third level, there weren't enough people who had opted to do art in fourth year, fifth at senior level, so they couldn't even make a class out of the people who wanted to do art. There wasn't a class, so I had obviously opted to do art, but there was no class. So, I mean, that gives you an insight into just how artistically barren that environment was. And I suppose anyone who's artistically minded would go a bit mad in that environment, and I went a bit mad, and I would go a bit mad again, and I think that's why I think now, having lived through that, to me I'm determined, more determined than ever, to have a riot within art as much as possible, to release as much music as possible, to write as much as possible, to record as much as possible, no matter how difficult it is, no matter how hard it is to make money, no matter how much the hipster indie mafia guard the gate posts and don't let people do anything unless you've got a fiddle sticking out of your ass. I'm determined to do it. And fortunately, I've met some really wonderful people in the last 6 months, essentially. The people at my label, Dimple Discs, my producer, Alan McGuire, who I've been working with for the past 2 years, more than 2 years, actually, my bandmates, and I think, fans who are kind of coming on board, what we're doing and what we're building. And it's a beautiful thing to see something grow very organically without, there's something that I love that Alan McGee said, and it's quoted in my favorite book on the music business, which is My Magpie Eyes Are Hungry for the Prize, The Creation Record Story and the History of the Independent Scene by David Kavanagh, who's a writer for Q Magazine. Fantastic book. If any of your listeners get a chance to check it out, I highly recommend it. But there's one particular moment where Alan McGee is talking about Primal Scream, and it's kind of early Primal Scream. This would have been, say, circa Velocity Girl. Certainly, it was pre Screamadelica. But he said something at one stage was, this is happening without the permission of the music business. And I think there's always that element of artistic agitators within indie, whether you've got Tony Wilson at Factory, whether you've got Alan McGee at Creation, Rough Trade, and obviously in days like today, people like yourself and people like Dimple Discs, people like FIFA Records, Eddie there, and it's something I think is so important, because it feels like, and I say this as an artist, not as someone who's actually in a I don't run a label or anything, but it feels like we're the resistance. We're in the forest, or we're on the battlefield, and we're brandishing our weaponry, and we're up against the might of this kind of vast warhorse, or kind of army facing us down with their artillery and their turrets. And we, it's like, what's the phrase, like bringing a bread knife to a gunfight. But we're bringing the bread knife regardless. And there's something beautiful about bringing the bread knife.
I love that. Yeah. We're like the Mujahideen when Russia invaded Afghanistan. We will not be beaten. But that's the thing. Like I'm glad you mentioned Blowtorch in that because in Dispatches there, because that's exactly how I feel. And to me, it's just a continuum that's gone on since the 50s probably, of the small people against the vested interests, and it will continue because there are always people to carry on the fight.
Yeah, exactly.
And I kind of do see it as a bit of a fight, to be honest. Not literal, but it's important.
It is.
That we just don't have this bland, vacuous conformity.
Yeah.
Because, there are voices out there that are really interesting that deserve to be heard, and you're one of them.
Thank you.
It's interesting that you mentioned the Pet Shop Boys, just to go back to when you started first listening to music, because I hope you don't mind me saying this, but I was listening to, I wrote it down now, where was it? What was the track I was listening to? Never O'Clock. It just really reminds me a little bit of Bananarama.
I love Bananarama. I'm a huge fan. That's what I should say that. I love them.
Your subject matter and your kind of artistic approach would be very different, but there's definitely an echo of them in there, and I think that's great.
Thank you so much. That's a real. I'm so delighted that you picked up on that, because something else that has probably made life more difficult for me as an indie artist is that even though I'm an indie person to the core, and I believe in indie values very much, and I have a very, I have a quite, left field approach, or as the Bunnymen used to call it, they used to refer to it as being cherry on or not cherry on. You're probably well aware of this, whereby a band who kind of did their own thing and existed outside of the mainstream and were sort of this strange, unwieldy object that didn't really fit in was not cherry on. And I think that they felt, you know, bands like Wire, you know, had that kind of quality. And while I think I've always had that, but at the same time, I have a real pop sensibility. I love pop music, and I love melody. I love great pop music, and I think that there is, and so that's why I'd never, you know, I kind of straddle two very different worlds. Maybe it's because, well, being a Gemini as I am, I have that kind of two-headed coin with everything pretty much. Kind of contrasts, and because I love the idea of, or I just think it's a really valid description. The line that being in this, I think Bono said it actually, being in the center, being right smack bang in the center of a contradiction is the best place to be. Because you're not really, you're a lot harder to pigeonhole, and it's harder to be restricted, because you're not really, you're evading being tied down, and you can cherry pick from both sides. So for me, it's like, I really love pop music, but I really love the kind of, you know, left field, obtuse, you know, approach, which I think is much more interesting than just kind of towing the line. So it's about getting those two things together. And I think there have been bands that have had those instincts. I mean, Nirvana would be a great example.
Sure.
You know, Kurt Cobain loved the Beatles, but he loved Black Flag. You know, Nirvana's songs are songs on Nevermind, which are obviously were, you know, it's kind of they're probably their most epochal release.
But they're so melodic, aren't they?
So melodic, and they're rooted in what I call the primary colors of pop music, which is killer hooks, choruses, you know, song structure. And that's kind of really my bag, even though I'm not as punky as Nirvana, but I would encompass, I think, you know, probably a broader range. Although at the moment, obviously, I'm 2 EPs down the line, but I've got so much material that will hopefully be coming out in the years to come. And it's just a question of trying to schedule it and trying to kind of release it, and trying to ensure that each song and each release gets its time in the sun before it's superseded by another release. So it's a bit of a balancing act with all that, but I just, Bananarama, I'm so glad that you picked up on that, because there's a romantic quality in their songs. And for example, in I Heard a Rumor, to me, that is probably the most definitive example of why pop music is such an integral aspect of youth and of the formative experiences that one goes through in wading through the waters of the emotional ocean. Because a song like I Heard a Rumor, it's so dramatic, and it's so incredibly, it's a thrilling kind of a heart rush. I find that song, and no matter how cynical I might be about relationships and about love and sex and all those things, for the 3 minutes that I listened to I Heard a Rumor, I believe, and all my system melts away. And that's one of the fantastic things about music, that it's that powerful that even someone who is a massive cynic about love life and sex life and relationships like me can become like a giggling,
3 minutes.
That's 3 minutes. I believe, and it really is the case. It's the only thing that can kind of suspend that disbelief. It's amazing. That's why I'll be eternally in love with pop music till the day.
That's brilliantly put, and I get that, and I think, I'd be similar in sort of a lot of ways. And to me, the kind of music which I think that would be a good example of a lot of the girl groups from the 60s. I don't know. I love bands like I like All Saints. I think I absolutely love All Saints.
Yes,
they have there's a certain wistful quality to them, slightly melancholic in places. it's kind of like poppy happy, but they kind of know that things aren't quite as they should be, or the world isn't quite as it should be. And they don't explicitly state it, but there's definitely something that's definitely in there, and that's, I think, it's that dissonance that creates that great music for me.
Definitely, All Saints are a great example. Not only did they have, obviously, the Chazanay wrote all the songs, which is brilliant that they didn't, have to engage in outside writers. But you get a song like Black Coffee, something, and even like sonically as well, there's something really dark about that in a way that I really admire the bands, and especially pop bands, who make it more difficult for themselves than they need to. If, like, for example, to me, like a band like the Spice Girls and a band like All Saints, they're a million miles apart, even though they would have essentially maybe demographically been bought by a similar kind of fan base. But to me, they're worlds apart. It's got a song like Never Ever, like 6 minutes long for a start. I mean, it's like a pop symphony. And it takes its time to roll out that story. It's not, 2 minutes. If it's going to be if it needs to be 6 minutes, it's 6 minutes. And that's an example of a song that I think needs to be as long as it is. Like This Is Hardcore by Pulp, like How Soon Is Now by the Smiths, or Barbarism Begins at Home by the Smiths, or one of the long ones. And it's wonderful when you get these epics. Obviously Bohemian Rhapsody, you get these Paranoid Android, you get these epics occasionally in music that are just these unwieldy beasts that are allowed to spread their sonic tentacles without being clipped and forced into a bite-sized chunk.
But they're not bloated. They're not artificially inflated. They just, as you said, they just run their course naturally, and it feels like they need to be that long. Because I mean, if you listen to the single version of How Soon Is Now, it just is like, really? Who on earth would edit that? I mean, it's crazy. It's mental.
I know.
But look, that's going back to the majors, I suppose, or people who don't have such a handle on creativity. So just to go back to how you got to where you are now, and I know we've taken a really enjoyable roundabout route to get there. Would you say that how you sound now, and I want to ask you about that in a minute, was you from the start, or has it been a struggle to get to that point?
That's a really good question. I think it's been a very natural evolution, but there are definitely growing pains along the way. Like there's certain elements that have been consistent, that have been there from the get-go. For example, the very first song I ever wrote, which no one will ever hear, the very first song I ever wrote is a song called Smith Bounces Back, which I wrote as a 16-year-old. And this goes back to Prisoner Cell Block H, because I was a huge fan of Prisoner Cell Block H. And there was a character in Prisoner Cell Block H called B. Smith. She was like the top dog at Wentworth Women's Gym. And the very first song I wrote it about her life, her experiences as a woman, and this was pre Me Too movement. This was pre, So even at that stage, like my very first song, I didn't write about myself. And if you look at what I do now and what I'm building, it's all about me writing about someone else. In this case, Inga Maria Hauser, where I channel my art through her, and I channel her through my art, and she becomes the art, and the art kind of becomes her. And I'm merely, or I consider myself merely a kind of a facilitator, to try and bring her voice to life 33 years after her murder. And by the way, just in case any of your listeners don't know, Inga Maria Hauser was a 18-year-old German artist, musician, and student from Munich who was murdered in Northern Ireland in 1988. And a notorious unsolved murder. I'm obsessed with the case. I've been spending the last 5 years researching and writing a very extensive blog called the Keeley Chronicles. All my songs are about her, and I'm determined that all my songs will always be about her. And but even right from the get-go, the fact that I wrote my very first song about was a character study essentially of someone else, which is quite unusual. I haven't really heard of other songwriters basing their very first song on someone other than themselves. So, and I did it very unconsciously. It was something to me that was just a natural thing to do, but it would probably be unnatural for other people. So I think that's something that was like, I wasn't aware at the time, but it was very much going to be a common thread between that very first song and what I'm doing today. So that was already in place. And I suppose guitar-wise, I have a very particular kind of guitar style, which is my own style, but I suppose you can hear maybe echoes in there of Johnny Marr and Bernard Butler and people like that. I love arpeggios. I just love playing, kind of tricksy arpeggios with.
I was going to mention that word myself.
Nice.
So you're more of a picker than a strummer.
I'm more of a picker, more of a picker than a Joe strummer. But I love strumming. But I suppose there's something beautifully ornate about the intricacies in arpeggiated parts, and especially when you get them chiming off against other guitar parts. And I suppose that was one of the things that really spoke to me about the Smiths earlier on, particularly a song like "Suffer Little Children," which I used to listen to it, and I Don't Owe You Anything. I used to listen to them over and over again, just hearing them chime, hearing those notes chime, and loving how it sounded. It was almost like it sounded like a spider, like a sonic spider web.
Okay.
I like glistening in kind of a dew. You could hear this. It wasn't like a straight line or a wave. It was very much kind of like it would oscillate and kind of bob and weave in and out. And I just loved how that sounded. So I think that's another thing that's been there from the get-go. But in other ways, like I've definitely, it has been, I think the biggest thing for me actually in terms of development has been my singing voice. It took me a while to find my singing voice. I had it at the start, and then I kind of lost it because I got really into kind of more comedic music. I got really into the Bonzo Dog Band, and I think my early live performances back when I was like solo, which was just such a traumatic experience. Because when you're playing live, if you're in a band and the audience don't know you or they don't give a fuck, which is pretty much all the time, and they'll talk over you. But if you're in a band, that's okay because you have access to volume and just turn it up to 11, or you can just play amongst yourselves and conjure up your own world. When you're solo and you don't have recourse to the landscape of musical options that you have within a band, it's tough. Like, you're really reliant on the audience shutting the fuck up.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think when you play acoustically, that sometimes is harder to do. And sometimes, you maybe audiences maybe have different reasons. Maybe they're out to have a good time and see their friends, and they don't want to just sit there and listen. And I totally get that. But there needs to be, the audience needs to do its own thing, just like the musician needs to do their own thing. But I think it's harder to do your own thing when you're on your own because it's drowned out and you can't hear yourself play. So I think that's one of the things. I think getting more sure-footed about myself vocally, something that has kind of improved gradually. But essentially, I kind of think I had all the pieces in place.
Okay.
But actually, now that I think of it, the one thing that's changed more than anything else, and changed for the better, is the fact that I found collaborators. That I'm no longer such a misfit that I can't find anyone. It's that I've got a wonderful producer in Alan, and great bandmates in Martin and Tim, and fantastic, a very supportive record label. in Dimple Discs. And I think having those people around me helped me do what I do so much easier than I could ever have done on my own. I think that's the one thing.
Okay. And that does make sense. And I think from the 2 EPs that you've released recently, you sound sure-footed, you sound confident, you sound like you're in the place where you were meant to be. And I mean, one of the things I was going to mention is your sense of melody. You need a very strong melodic sense in the tracks, in all of them. And also that you mentioned it there, what you were just saying, Keeley, about that inhabiting another persona or looking at it from a third-party point of view. Which song was I thinking of? To a London Sunrise is an extraordinary song because it's written in the first person, but the first person is not you, it's somebody else.
Exactly.
Which is not something that most people would be able. Well, I don't think most people would even think of it. But it's not. It's also something that's quite difficult to do. Morrissey was quite well known for writing songs from other people's point of view, particularly from women's point of views, which was unusual at the time. I think Ray Davies maybe could do it a little bit. You think of songs like Waterloo Sunset. Paul Simon maybe. I don't know. I'm kind of throwing out some big names here, but it's a difficult trick to pull off. Beautiful song. Yeah, and I don't know whether you feel that you've reached this place of, I'm not necessarily saying it's contentment or happiness. I mean, I don't want to put words into your mouth, but you sound artistically like you're in a good place, I suppose, is what I'm trying to say.
Thank you. Well, yeah, it feels like at this time when there's so much uncertainty in the world, and even in relatively close to home in terms of COVID and the impact it has on our lives. I mean, we don't really know what's happening one minute to the next. People are putting on gigs and they're having to postpone them and having to cancel them. And yet, despite all this uncertainty in my life and in everyone's life, I feel that there's one thing, or there's two things that I can kind of hold on to. And also, like, my living scenario is very uncertain. I mean, I don't own this place. I'm going to be out on my arse next summer. But I have my artistic identity, to me is very clear and very set in stone. I think that's one of the things when the label approached me, and one of the questions they asked, I thought this is a great question, but I wasn't expecting to be asked this, but I thought this is one of the reasons why I think Dimple Discs have the right approach, and indie labels have the right approach, because they asked me, what's your vision? And I was like, wow, that's like, just as well I know exactly what my vision is, because if I didn't, I'd be at a loss. But I knew exactly what my vision was, and was able to write a very lengthy, possibly too lengthy, on exactly what I wanted to do, what I wanted to say, why and how, and I think that's one thing. I think having that concept, and sort of, it's very natural, because I mean, my whole life I've had really two interests: music and true crime. And when I discovered Inga's case, and it had such an enormous emotional impact on me and stimulated feelings in me that I didn't have about anyone else and haven't had about anyone else, which is really weird because I never met her, and she had been dead 28 years at that stage, 33 years now. And as far as I know, it's unprecedented in music for someone to become so overtaken by someone else, specifically a murder victim, that they would base their entire career, entire discography or body work on that one person. But it's when I ask myself and I look in my heart, what do I want to write about? It's the only way. In fact, it's become the only way I can write. If I don't write about Inga, I don't write. And there's some weird quasi-spiritual, maybe artistic thing. I don't quite understand it myself. And maybe that's a good thing, because that sense of mystery keeps me trying to solve the mystery of partly what happened to her and also what happened to me to end up in this strange quagmire. So I think artistically, having that real sure-footed sense of self, and it's something that I can kind of trace back to those tendencies as a teenager to be an awkward, very and you'll get this because I very much get the feeling that you have had similar struggles and that you've come up against similar perils and similar opposition in the course of doing what you do and becoming what you are. In fact, become what you are. There's a title by Juliana Hatfield, an album title by Juliana Hatfield 3 called "Become What You Are," and I always loved that title because I felt, and it sounds like an oxymoron, but in a way, that's it. Become what you are. I think people, I kind of feel in my own life that I've just become like a clearer version of what I always was as I've gone through life. And circumstances conspire and things happen to shape, or sort of not even shape us, but kind of almost like reaffirm those qualities that were nascent but have kind of been honed over the time.
And do you think Inga, even though, as you said, she'd been dead 28 years when you started the Keeley Chronicles, do you think Inga actually helps you become what you are?
I think Inga is like, for me, she's like the center of the map. She's like, it's like the intersection where all roads meet. So music, true crime, my obsession with the past. I've always had this thing about the past, about certain years and certain eras, and how it looked back then, what it was like. I find it fascinating. One of the things, for example, on the artwork for Echo Everywhere, for the physical edition, which is being prepared. Obviously, there's this global vinyl shortage and no one can press records, but we're working on it. But and the CD as well. We'll have CDs actually at the London gig and the Lexington. But there's a 4-panel artwork that I've designed. And there's a very specific photo, well, actually 2 specific photos that are on the inlay that were shot in the year 1988. I'm obsessed with that year. And that's part of, again, I sort of see Inga as like the gateway or the doorway to another world. And I find it so poignant and so bittersweetly beautiful, this sense of loss and the sense of the past. And it's hard for me to articulate because I feel it, but I find it really difficult to kind of put it into words, but I try. But it's just this feeling I have around that time, around, that week that she was in the UK in late March, early April 1988. That block of time to me is massively inspiring, and I'm obsessed with trying to see what she saw, how it looked, simple things, mundane things. Like, for example, I've retraced her steps and revisited every railway station that she had been in, with the exception of Harwich. But I will get to Harwich eventually. But as in every railway station in England and Scotland, and yeah. But seeing those places as it was then, obviously I can't get there. I can't go back to 1988, and I would do anything to be able to go back to 1988. I'd do anything to be able to meet her, even just for 5 minutes, and to be able to save her from her, the horrendous fate that awaited her when she arrived in Northern Ireland. And there's just, so I suppose to paraphrase, is it Sons of Southern Ulster? Dermot Defence always playing there's songs, people say I live in the past.
Yeah.
I live in the past, very much so. And I suppose in a way, it helps me to cope with the present. The kind of, and I think music is like my lifeline. It's how I get there. It's how I get to April 1988 is by listening to specific songs that evoke that time, that point in time. And I feel feelings that I have kind of surrounding Inga and that time. And it's a weird blend where it's like, it's really difficult to define and to sum up, but I suppose I try and express it through my own music. And that's kind of what the story that's kind of gradually growing involves.
Yeah, it's interesting because it doesn't seem to stop you moving forward, though.
Yeah, that's very true. It's a really odd thing. It's almost like the further I delve into the past, the further I move into the future. And I think that's just my own weird dynamic. I think if it was somebody else, that might not work. Or if I was to solely focus on the future, I probably it wouldn't work. Or if I was solely focusing on, but for some reason, that's how it's like the dynamics or the kind of workings of my mind and of artistically. And I mean, Fiona O'Brien on RT Radio 1, the presenter of Late Date and the guitarist and the Hot House Flowers, and he's an actor and loads of things. And he's an excellent broadcaster, and he's been really supportive. He's been the one person at RT who's been more supportive of me and my music than anyone. But he said something really good on his show recently, because he played To a London Sunrise, and he said that what the EPs do, the Echo Everywhere EP and Brave Warrior EP, they kind of invite you into a musical dream world involving, the story of Inga Maria Hauser and that, that kind of lost land. And that's exactly what I'm kind of trying to do. I love it when people pick up on things like that, because it's just, it's lovely when that's apparent to people, and like, it's that it resonates enough for the people who pick up on it to pick up on it.
Lots of artists have a touchstone. They have the thing that they go back to. I mean, people write about the town that they were born in for their whole careers, don't they? Some people, Bruce Springsteen made a career out of that.
My hometown, absolutely. I think the other thing is, I remember listening to an interview with Richard Wright recently. Well, it was an interview he shot, obviously, before he died, obviously. But he said how Roger Waters writes about the war, his father, and madness. That's what he writes about, and if what he's pretty much always written. And I think that's great. In a way, if that's, if they're the subjects that he wants to tackle, then and he finds that there's enough within those subjects to keep him permanently engaged, then that's great. And it's I just love that it's possible to do it, and I'm loving this year for all of the difficulties, and but I love that having an opportunity to realize my vision artistically and to get on the radio with it and to kind of infiltrate the mainstream in my own, small way, is really exciting. And from the perspective of Inga, I love that in my own way. I'm able to keep a part of her alive, and I'm able to give her a voice that she otherwise wouldn't have, and doesn't have otherwise, because no one else written songs about her. And then, in a way, to get her perspectives or get her story into the wider world, so that even though she's no longer in the world and she's been out of the world for 33 years, that she's still capable. And this is someone who, Inga she never made a record. She never, she was only 18 when she was murdered, and with her whole life ahead of her. But it's like a strange, sort of a quasi afterlife in a way. It's like a virtual afterlife where she's here, and despite not being here. And then, I mean, that's in the song "Never Here, Always There." That's exactly what I'm kind of getting at. The fact that this is somebody who isn't around.
What's in your mind the night you arrived? The light in your eyes. What did he say to make you mistake his lies for a lifeline? Never here, always there. Never here, always there.
In my mind, she's always there. So it's just this really mysterious thing. And another reason that I think, for me, Inga is like the ultimate intersection between all the things that I love, is because my vision for the band's live sound was very much from the get-go. I wanted it to be very atmospheric and very immersive and very, like, my modus operandi is bliss out, don't miss out, because I get totally lost in music, and it's the only way that I can achieve that escapism. I don't drink, I don't do drugs, I'm celibate, so I don't have any other way of getting out of my mind other than just swimming in sound, which I love doing. And when I'm there in that space, and I get to it in our rehearsals just as well as I do at gigs, and I tell you what, the guitar soundscapes and the sound that we create as a band, and the songs, and Inga's story, singing Inga's story from her perspective, it just captivates me, and kind of like I just escape into this musical dream world. And it's a very odd thing, because if you think to yourself, like, it's probably the darkest, or one of the darkest, most harrowing and horrendous, murder cases. One of the cruelest fates to have befallen anyone, the specific circumstances of Inga's murder. And yet, when you look at the intention she had when she set off on her journey, it was the polar opposite. She was alive, free, happy. She was having the best week of her life. And in that week, the final week of her life, she had no idea that within days her life would be over. And I found there's such a bittersweet dichotomy between the happiness she was feeling and the freedom she was feeling, and the grinding halt that was going to bring her journey to such an abrupt and premature conclusion within days. So those days where she had this, where she was living her dream, I feel have kind of been obscured over the years, because the press invariably focus on the murky aspects of the case and the gory details. And while the gory details are obviously part of the story, but I'm really keen to try and, I suppose, put a spotlight on the original mission that Inga had, and on who she was, because who she was is very much tied in with how she was during that last week of her life. And it's just what I love to do. And I just believe in it, and I believe in her, and I believe in music, and that's all I believe in. I don't believe in anything else. I don't believe in religion. I don't believe in politics. I don't believe in politicians anyway. I don't believe in anything but just music and Inga Marie's Dream. And there's a song called Inga Marie's Dream that's going to be on the album that's already in the live set. So yeah, there's a lot more to come.
Wow, that's really powerful stuff, Keeley, I have to say.
Thank you.
It is unusual to have a musician or an artist with such a singular vision. It's remarkable. I mean, listeners, won't be able to see you on the podcast. I mean, I can see the passion in you. And yeah, it's extraordinary. And this, is possibly a difficult question. And, I'll wrap up soon, because I know you've given a lot of your time and your passion and your energy. If the case was solved, how do you feel that would affect the way you write about Inga?
That's a really good question. It's really difficult for me to know the answer to that, because I think I couldn't be sure for sure until that happened. And I was in that space. But I would imagine that it wouldn't change.
Okay.
That I would stay as I am. Because, for example, I think emotionally, she and her story, her essence, whatever it is about her that keeps drawing me to the flame, is so profound and so powerful, and I feel it on such a good level that without it, I would find it unbearable. And during a recording session, Alan and I, we were working on just a few months back. Alan asked me, what are you going to do when the album is finished? And he was wondering, is this the end of it? And I was like, it hadn't even occurred to me that I might stop, because, and I felt like bursting into tears, because the thought of, it felt to me in that moment, when I suddenly considered the prospect of stopping or of going off and writing something else, I found it utterly unbearable, because to me it felt like if I do that, she's gone forever. Like the final connection, the final thread would be lost. And on a head level, to me, that maybe it doesn't make so much sense, but on an emotional level, it's there. And I think I've spent so long, 5 years, writing solely about her and writing songs exclusively about her, that it would feel like losing such a part of myself, because even though I write about her and I write from her perspective, it's become a part of me, and I can't let that go. So it's a strange thing, and it's something. It's probably only going to get stranger, because I think, the press reviews so far have in the UK and the US and elsewhere have been so positive, but I think the story is still quite a novel thing, that this artistic journey, which is unprecedented, is taking place. But I wonder what the press will be like if album 2 and album 3 and album 4 and album 5 and album 6 and album 7, because I am that dogged and I am that crazy. And I suppose I'm that determined to see this through, that's what I'm determined to do. And it could be something a bit like, and I think in a way I have to be that way, because I was that way in school, and I never, bowed down. And just like that, just now and in the future, I won't bow down. Whatever the press say or don't say, whatever the music business say or don't say, however many copies it sells or doesn't sell. And I've said this before, if the album sells 1 million copies, great. If it sells 1 copy, great. I am going to do it no matter what. And that's the thing. And I think having that, just that determination to see it through, is something that hopefully will sort of hold me in good stead as I grind through the gears towards the my ultimate kind of destination of building this kind of artistic arc and sailing it as far as I can.
I am slightly in awe of you, Keeley. I have to say, your commitment and passion and that integrity. It's authentic integrity, to see it through. I think the question I originally asked about solving the murder, it's kind of irrelevant, really. I'm just looking at it from a practical point of view. So much more than that. And, like many of the best songs, you don't need to explain them. They just are. Why would you ever want somebody explaining what a Cocteau Twins song is about? Just enjoy it for what it is, kind of what music does to you, what sound does to you.
Yeah, absolutely. The Cocteaus are a perfect example of that. Where a song like, say, Pearly Dewdrops Drops, which is such a brilliant title. I don't know what it means, and I don't need to know what it means. It's a beautiful mangling of vowels and sounds and words, and Liz Fraser's vocals and lyrics do that, and managed to communicate so much emotion without any sense of, literal, logical storytelling necessarily. It's like an emotional language that she speaks. It's just so beautiful and so graceful and perfect pop music in a perfect world. That's what would be, on the radio all the time.
Look, Keeley, I don't want to keep you any longer. It's been a fabulous conversation. It's been great crack. It's been emotional. I've learned things as well. And I'm sure our listeners have too. And thank you for bringing us through your life, your inspirations, your journey, just so openly and kind of laying yourself bare at times as well. So thank you very much. Really appreciate it.
You're so welcome. Thank you so much for having me.
Anytime. There may be a part 2.
Oh, I would relish it. Thanks, Richard.
So, Keeley, thank you very much. Really appreciate your time.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye-bye. I don't think there's any need for me to say any more, except thank you very much, Keeley Moss. I would urge you to listen to her tracks and check out the Keeley Chronicles. And for now, I'm going to play out with the appropriately titled Last Words. Till the next time.